Welcome to the What Really Happened radio show. The history the government hopes you never learn. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It is Thursday, January 7th, 2016. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have got a lot of stuff to talk about today. We're going to get right into it. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. Tom is in our control room ready to answer the phone. A couple of quick program notes. Today, our third hour guest is Fred Grieger. He's the author of a book called Chase the Rabbit, on the subject of the erosion of property rights in America. He's going to be talking to us about some of the issues surrounding the Hammond Ranch debacle up in Oregon. The lovely Lady Claire will be joining us in hour number 3 of our show tomorrow. And next Tuesday in our third hour, Kevin Barrett will be our guest talking about a brand new book he has out on the Charlie Hebdo false flag. So we got a lot of interesting stuff coming up in the immediate future. Now then, trying to escalate the situation apparently over in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia bombed Iran's consulate in the capital of Yemen. Now, there was no diplomatic personnel on the grounds, but there were security forces and they got injured. Now, bombing somebody's embassy or consulate or mission, that's an act of war. And obviously, Iran is very upset over this diplomatic affront. Saudi Arabia is saying, well, look what you did to our embassy over there in Tehran. Well, there's a little bit of a difference. The embassy in Tehran was attacked by a mob that was not sanctioned by the government of Iran. In fact, they may have been agent provocateurs that went in there to trash this Saudi embassy and just start this whole cascade leading up to war between Saudi Arabia and Iran, in which your kids are going to be expected to be killed and crippled. Adding fuel to the fire, the Saudi coalition is dropping U.S.-supplied cluster bombs on civilian populations in the Yemen capital. That is a war crime, to use those cluster bombs. And the U.S. government is complicit. Sadly, you all paid for it. Now, we are seeing more and more commentary about how Saudi Arabia may be in serious trouble because their actions against Iran and Yemen are causing a tremendous amount of discord in the Middle East, which may be the design objective, and a lot of upset within Saudi Arabia itself. Now, Saudi Arabia, the ruling family, has kept control over the region because they generously spend a huge amount of their oil wealth on the people. The Saudi people get a lot of free stuff. They get very low-priced gasoline. All of that now is going away. Gas prices are going up, and a lot of the other free perks being handed out by the Saudi royal family are now being cut off, and that's just accelerating the discontent. And so we're seeing articles like this one in Zero Hedge saying it's time to send the despicable House of Saud to the dustbin of history. However, we need to be very careful here, because when this whole dollarification of the Middle East began, going into Iraq, trying to go into Syria, going into Libya and Yemen, and Saudi Arabia was working hand in glove with the United States. I speculated that Saudi Arabia is probably cooperating with the United States in the hope that Saudi Arabia would be left alone in this plan to conquer all of the Middle East, impose U.S. puppet rules, and shackle the oil to the dollar. And I said I wouldn't bet on that. And remember, it was about a year ago Saudi Arabia started talking about selling their oil for currencies other than the dollar, and I said at that point, they're now on the U.S. government special high-interest targets list. So all of this internal strife and talk about bringing down the royal family, it may be legitimate. It could also be another attempt by the U.S. government to impose puppet rule on an oil-rich Middle Eastern nation. A lot of people are wondering why the U.S. continues to avoid criticizing Saudi Arabia, not only for what they're doing in Iran, what they're doing in Yemen, and it all comes down to dollars and cents. Saudi Arabia and Qatar are among the top U.S. weapons buyers, despite the very obvious human rights abuses going on in both countries. And to the U.S. government, money is it. If you've got money to spend on U.S. products, then you are our friends. We don't care what you're doing to your own people here. Now, getting on back to Yemen, defense officials have finally been forced to admit to Congress that they have managed to misplace $500 million of weapons in Yemen. Small arms, ammunition, night vision goggles, patrol boats, vehicles. This was all equipment supposedly donated by the United States, paid for by you, to the puppet ruler of Yemen after the intervention a few years back. And now nobody knows where it went. Who's got it? Who's using it? Russia has started deploying more anti-aircraft missiles into Syria, including the S-400. And as a result, despite all the bluff and bluster coming out of London and Washington, D.C., the British air campaign in Syria has stopped. And the U.S. air campaign in northern Syria has stopped. They're still going into southern Syria and bombing Syrians wherever they can. But Russia has succeeded in setting up a de facto no-fly zone over Syria. If you are not there with the permission of Syria, you're in big, big trouble. Meanwhile, Obama is at least giving lip service to Turkey withdrawing their unauthorized forces from Iraq. Now, this came out during a phone call between Obama and Prime Minister Haider al-Abadi of Iraq, and the White House released a statement. Whether they really are going to put pressure on Turkey to withdraw their forces or not, of course, remains entirely to be seen. Now, apparently somebody released an internal timeline from the State Department regarding Syria, which establishes March of next year, 2017, as the date when Assad will step down from president of Syria. So, I told you they weren't giving up, despite publicly saying Russia is right and Assad can stand for election. The internal documents being leaked, the U.S. still wants Assad out. And to heck with what the Syrian people want. These issues are too important to let the Syrian people choose their own government. That's just ridiculous. We're going to go ahead and grab a phone call here from Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, Steve. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk about the things that's been going on over the years, and there's four things that really stand out for me.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is being a military, being overseas, coming back, the drugged up, the suicidal, and homeless.
Yes.
Another is the open border policy. Number three is the Department of Agriculture, the Post Office, and Homeland Security buying all these hollow point bullets. And now they're trying to take our guns away. I mean, to me, that screams out what their plan is.
Oh, yeah. Anybody who's objectively looking at what the government is doing as opposed to what the government is saying sees exactly the preparations to establish a total tyranny in the United States, because the U.S. government has gone too far down this war path and economic path they can't turn around. And the only way they can keep moving forward is they have to get rid of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and establish an absolute tyrannical rule of you will do what we tell you. And even then, they're still going to lose the war.
Not only that, now they've got to the point where the people are hesitant about turning to the police with their brutality. So we're pretty much on our own.
Yeah, we really are, and we need to recognize that and conduct our lives and our lifestyles like that. You know, the government wanted us all dependent on government services to keep us under control, but the government services just aren't there anymore. Obamacare destroyed health care. The police are stealing more from the American people through civil forfeiture than criminals are. They're murdering more innocent Americans than the mass shooters and the terrorists put together. And so it's a real problem. All the services the U.S. government wants to force us to be dependent on, we don't want to have anything to do with.
Mm.
Okay?
And one quick point too is that's all right. I'll say it tomorrow.
All right. Well, we'll talk to you tomorrow. Then thank you for the phone call, Steve, and we'll be right back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show here now. Up in Ukraine, the real world is finally beginning to break through the fog of propaganda. It's been nearly 2 years since the U.S.-backed coup d'etat drove the legitimate elected government from Kiev. And yes, they had a high degree of corruption, just like our own government. But the aftermath is the corruption has gotten far worse. Ukraine is wallowing in graft and cronyism, And the living standards for the average Ukrainians have plummeted. And that has been the aftermath of every single U.S. intervention in history. The U.S. will send your kids into these countries saying, we're bringing them democracy, we're bringing them peace, we're saving them from a cruel tyrant. But the absolute inevitable net result is their standard of living is crushed down to the dirt, so that the wealth of the nation can be harvested off by multinational corporations, mostly the banks. Now, over in Paris, they've had a shooting, a gentleman wielding a knife, wearing a fake explosive vest, shouting Allah Akbar and carrying a paper ISIS flag, made a big stink around the police station. Naturally, he got shot and killed. And I don't think he was expecting it because, frankly, this reeks of a PR stunt. And we're seeing a whole bunch of these hoaxes all over the place, trying to remind us all that Israel are always the victims and the Palestinians and Arabs are bad. There was another one over in Cairo near a hotel where masked gunmen opened fire on a tour bus carrying several Israeli tourists. They didn't hit anybody. They just fired around there. And we're seeing so many of these hate crime hoaxes. Israel's trying to regain its global image of being the perpetual victim, and they're not really getting any traction, especially as more and more comes out about what Israel's been doing in Gaza, what Israel's been doing in the West Bank, what they're doing in East Jerusalem, what they're doing in Syria, what they're doing in Lebanon. Now, China did a demonstration of capability, I guess is a good way to describe it. They flew 2 commercial aircraft onto their man-made island in the South China Sea. And the reaction from the Western media was immediate. Oh, there's going to be an air defense zone over the area. This is a provocation, blah, blah, blah. These were commercial passenger jets that China landed on their man-made island. And this idea that this area is disputed, how do you dispute something that didn't exist? China built this island. And it is called the South China Sea. It's just another way of trying to get that war going. And you can see it. Washington, D.C. is desperate. They're in a panic. They've got to get a really bloody world war going before the economy implodes. Or the American people are going to blame, and justly so, private central banking, Wall Street, and the complicit U.S. government for the destruction. The devastation. Have you noticed in the corporate media, every time they talk about the stock market hit, it's all caused by China. It's really all China's fault. It's all blame, hate China. No, it isn't. China's a victim of the U.S. economic decline because China's economy is based primarily on manufacturing and exports, and their biggest export customer was the United States. But as all the money has been taken away from ordinary Americans to put in the pockets of the money junkies, we can't buy those Chinese products anymore. So, of course, Chinese manufacturing goes into decline. It's not like China went out and said, let's do something that's going to wreck the global economy. They're trying to scapegoat them. More about that a little bit later in the program. Meanwhile, Congress has passed this bill basically repealing most of Obamacare. It's a little too late. The damage has already been done for most Americans. And defunding Planned Parenthood. Now, it's a largely symbolic move because everybody understands Obama will veto this bill. Congress does not have a veto-proof majority, but the backlash from that veto will become a problem for Hillary this November. Even Congress is finally admitting Obamacare was a complete, unmitigated disaster. And it was. There's no question about it. Now then, as you're already aware, the Dow Jones Industrial, the whole stock market just got tanked today. China, Europe, here in the U.S., it's the downside of globalism. It's all being dragged down together by this interlocking, interdependent system. At one point, the Dow was down 430. They managed to get it back up into we only lost 300. But the market has lost 5% of its entire value year to date. It's only 4 days in. Now, no doubt, tomorrow the plunge protection team will massage the markets to produce the traditional Friday happy ending. But a few more days of these kinds of losses and we will see panic selling, and beyond that, a derivatives implosion. But remember, according to the corporate media, this is all China's fault. When the economy implodes, it's China's fault. We have to go to war against China because they ruined the American economy. All right, we're going to take a phone call. John in Barbados, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? John, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm looking at the general economic situation with the market the way it is, and then we're looking at all the problems that the Veterans Association is experiencing with, 40 or 50,000 people still waiting to be seen. And the way the American people are feeling, another war is not really what they're going to be looking at. And even if there is another war, how enthusiastic will the American soldier, sailor and airman engage in it? Because they really don't want anything to do with it.
Yeah, it is a disaster here, but unfortunately, the U.S. government is going on the historical tradition that they pulled this off twice before. Crash of 1907, World War I, crash of 1929, World War II. And it worked. The American people shifted their anger away from Wall Street and Washington, D.C. onto the Germans and the Japanese and whoever else we were supposed to hate. But it's not going to work this time. But D.C. doesn't know anything else to do.
Well, it's not going to work for another reason. And the other reason, of course, is the gun grabbers. People are really getting fed up with this nonsense.
Oh, they are. I'm hearing it all over the place. People are getting really, really angry. And they should. You have every right to be angry at the way you have been treated by the government at this point. You should be angry. Let yourself be angry. Okay? To heck with anger management. I am ticked off. John, got to let you go. Take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, and we'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, I have a comment here for those of you who are still invested in the stock market. Yesterday we were talking about how there was a Federal Reserve official who came out admitting that all of the central banks have been creating money out of thin air and using them to buy stocks to drive up the price of the stock market and make it look good. What they call the wealth effect. And the government goes along with this because they can point to the stock market numbers and say, see, the economy's doing good. And if you're homeless and hungry and jobless, it has to be your own fault. Don't blame us. But the problem is the market is overvalued when you use such manipulation on it. Basically, this Federal Reserve official admitted to a apparently government-sanctioned pump and dump scam, which would land anybody else doing it in prison. But the result is the stock market is overvalued. The actual worth of the stocks do not support the prices created through these manipulation of supply and demand. And what that means is when the panic starts, the first ones to bail will get their money out of the market. And everybody else is going to get stuck. Because the prices will crash down until whatever value there is in the underlying stocks can prop up and support the prices. And so for the vast majority of the American people, that impressive-looking number you've got on the bottom of your brokerage statement, that's all you're going to be left with. A piece of paper with an impressive-looking number on it. And because of that awareness among the investor class, when the panic hits, it's going to hit fast and hard. And because our stock market is so overvalued, there's a long way for it to go down. Even George Soros is out there saying this is all heading into a repeat of 2008. And I'm sure a lot of people are going to be listening to George Soros and saying, well, if Soros says we're on the verge of a crash, it's time to get out our little parachutes. Mark Faber is out there saying that gold's upside outweighs its downside. The S&P stock market downside outweighs its upside. We're hearing this from a lot of people. UBS technical analysts saying, get out of stocks, get into gold. They're all out there saying, yeah, we're heading for a heck of a ride. All right, we're going to go ahead and grab ourselves a phone call from Tim in California. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I just wanted to say that over the holidays, I went to quite a few different functions as far as work and family and stuff, and I was kind of taken back at the amount of people that are awake out there. I mean, just it kind of blew me away at different, functions and stuff like that. People are just, about different topics about what's going on, but I mean, people are really awake about, what's really happening out there.
I'm seeing it here, too. Including among our local military and police. They all think things have just gone horribly wrong.
Yeah, and but anything, I was calling about that Obama speech the other day and all those Sandy Hook people there and stuff like that. And I recently looked into the Sandy Hook, and I wasn't aware, but, a few months before that, 9 months, a year before, they passed legislation in Connecticut to have no death photos released, no birth certificates released.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, stuff that no other state in the United States had, and all that was passed kind of on the down low and
how very convenient for the cover up. But at this point, the Sandy Hook hoax is pretty much out there. The school was not even active at the time. It was just used as a stage. Looking at the photos, you can see the building is in a terrible state of disrepair that would never be allowed if it were a functioning school. Broken steps, banisters, rails, mold all over the place. Clearly the classroom's being used for storage. The whole thing was a fraud. And, I especially love that video of that one father that they were going to interview, and he comes out and he's laughing and smiling, and then you can see him go through this actor exercise to get down and looking upset and sad. And it's good that video got out there, because it just hammers home. Again, we live under a government that rules us through lies, fraud, and deception. We all agree on that. We don't need to investigate or debate or discuss anything else. The U.S. government controls us with lies, fraud, and deception. Now all Americans have to start asking themselves, what am I going to do about that? Do I want my children to grow up under a government that rules them with lies, fraud, and deception? And if you don't, then the time to do something about it is now.
Yeah, people are just really upset. And another video that kind of wakes people up on that Sandy Hook is the older gentleman that said that the 5 kids showed up in his front lawn, and he brought them into the house, and there's a video online where somebody leaked and showed him practicing his lines for what he was going to say in front of the camera.
Yeah, that was a good one. And I especially loved it when, the officer in charge of the operation there literally went on TV and said, don't you dare believe any conspiracy theories you see on the Internet. Don't you dare. You're just increasing the suffering and pain. Don't you go out to that independent media.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing.
Yeah.
But, anyway, that was it, but thanks, Mike, and you have a good day.
Thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go. Now then, Iran and India have reached an agreement to settle their cross-border trades in rupees, their own national currencies. They are dumping the U.S. dollar. It's the beginning of a trend. So what's the U.S. going to do now? Declare war on India? Over in Great Britain, George Osborne is saying that Britain is currently facing what he calls a cocktail of serious threats from a slowing global economy in 2016. Remember when everybody thought economic globalism was such a good thing? Business was going to be better. We don't have to worry about borders and regulations and the rest of it. And look what a mess it's created. National borders serve the same function for planet Earth that fireproof doors do in buildings and watertight bulkheads do in ships. They contain accidents so that the entire system is not threatened. If you prop open the fireproof doors, one office fire takes out the entire building. If you prop open the watertight hatches on the bulkheads of a ship, you can get around a lot faster. The first leak sinks your entire ship. Same thing with economic globalism. It was economic globalism that allowed the crash of the U.S. mortgage-backed security fraud in 2008 to become a global crisis, whose effects are still manifesting today. Meanwhile, over in Turkey, they're applying for inclusion into the European Union and United States Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership. which I think they're doing more to build a sense of political alignment than any perceived economic advantage. And certainly for the ordinary people of Turkey, the TTIP is as much a disaster as it is for ordinary people in the United States and the European Union. Peter Schiff is out there saying it's time for Americans to buy gold. Now, Macy's has announced they are going to close 40 stores across the nation. Their sales this last Christmas were 4.7% below what they were the previous year. And even with higher prices because of the devaluation of the dollar, that means the volume of shopping dropped even more. Macy's has had to drop their earnings forecast 12%. Macy's actually came on out and blamed the drop in sales on, and you know this is coming, human-caused global warming. It was the warm weather. People just didn't go to the mall. No, it's because people didn't have money to spend. Because the money junkies grabbed it all. The Federal Reserve private central banking system is by design to take the money away from the people and put it in the pockets of the bankers, and nobody had a plan for what to do when they succeeded. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. And Fox News is still going on about the performance of the stock market today, and still out there saying this is all, has to do with China's economy. China just messed it up for the rest of us. We were in an economic recovery, honest, and China just ruined it for everybody. Don't you hate them? Anyway, as we mentioned yesterday, Puerto Rico has defaulted on their $37 million debt, which isn't a lot of money in this era of trillion-dollar derivatives disasters, but it's a lot of money, $37 million. And they are now going to get a bailout, courtesy of you, the American taxpayer. Now, this money is not going to go to Puerto Rico. It's going to go to the hedge funds that were playing around with Puerto Rico's debt. The whole system is set up to take money from you and give it to the Wall Street money junkies. That's what it's all supposed to do. Nobody's really thinking about what's good for the actual economy out here on Main Street, USA. It's just greed run rampant. Now, Mitsubishi has an auto plant here in the United States. They were trying to find somebody who would buy it, but they have not been able to find anybody willing to take it over, so they're just going to close it, shut it down, sell off the machinery, lay off all the workers. Kind of reminds me of that Tom Hanks movie Gung Ho about the Japanese auto company that comes to the U.S. And it's a funny film, and it actually talked about a lot of the culture shock that these ventures ran into. Twitter just closed at its lowest price ever. Twitter has lost 47% since its IPO. The gun stocks are up. Smith & Wesson, Remington, all those companies, their stock price is going through the roof, thanks to Barack Obama and Gabby Giffords and the other gun grabbers. And by the way, we put up an article about how Gabby Giffords and her anti-gun group are out there with their first national ad, and I felt like commenting on it with this photo of Gabby Giffords practicing shooting at a target with a kid on it with an AR-15. See, Gabby Giffords is another one of these gun grabbers who thinks it's okay for her to have these kind of weapons. It's just you that can't be trusted with them. Meanwhile, over in Ukraine, we were talking about how the quality of life for the Ukrainian people has been destroyed by the U.S. coup d'etat. Inflation in Ukraine has hit 43.3%. That's a very bad sign. Article coming out of newsforge.com. Most Americans can't handle a $500 surprise bill. Most Americans, if they get an unexpected $500 expense, they have to borrow to cover it. And coming out of the Ebenezer Scrooge file, especially as we are going into winter, over in Denver, Colorado, there is a group called Denver Homeless Out Loud. They're a group of activists, and they started building these little tiny micro houses. And they set up an area called Sustainability Park and built a micro home community for the homeless. And Saturday, 70 officers from the Denver Police and Sheriff's Department went to Sustainability Park and demolished the homes. They were supported by SWAT units with helicopters. The official excuse is they didn't have proper permits. If your papers are not in order, we make you homeless again. Where is the humanity in government today? Apparently there doesn't seem to be any. It's just make sure the paperwork is filled out and pay your fees, and that's all you're good for out there. And if you can't fill out the paperwork and pay the fees, then go off and die someplace. Now, getting on to the campaigns and the candidates, it's kind of interesting. Not too long ago, the GOP was kind of castigated as the perpetual war party. Oh, the Republicans always want war, and they still do. But it's kind of interesting going into this election season. The Democratic candidates are just as bloodthirsty. Every time they talk about foreign policy, inevitably their solution is a military one. They all love war. Now, as you know, Hillary Clinton is still going after Donald Trump over his comments that we ought to be cautious about allowing Muslims into the United States without proper security vetting. And a lot of people think that's outrageous. But as this article over in Press TV points out, Hillary Clinton is the one who presided over the genocide in Libya in 2011. We came, we saw, he died. Ha 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 ha. And of course, Libya is now a failed state. It's been destroyed. Remember that premiere episode of HBO's The Newsroom? I love that show. I'm sorry it's over. I wish they would continue it. Where the main character, Will McAvoy, comes out with this brilliant speech about America is not the greatest nation on earth anymore. And I think somebody in the U.S. government had their little feelings hurt. And they decided that because they can't actually make America great any longer, what they're going to do is wreck every other country on earth. Send it into rubble and poverty, and then they can say, see, America's the greatest nation on earth again. We just wrecked everybody else, and we're number one. That's really not, I think, what people understand by a march toward greatness. Shattering everybody else around you. Now, as you know, there is growing talk about what was going on with Libya, Benghazi, Hillary Clinton's email server. Hillary's trying to put it in the past. Her campaign talking points is, oh, that's so yesterday. You're just being picky to talk about it today. This is 2016. We want to talk about 2016. But over in the Congress, things are getting very, very tense because it's coming out of the Benghazi committee that the State Department has been deliberately misleading on Hillary Clinton's emails. Documents were not provided. Hillary's chief of staff, Cheryl Mills, who knew about the private email server, was given requests for information that she never responded to. Never took any steps to clear up the inquiries or reveal the email account. Now, a lot of people are going to say, well, why, it's a secret. Why should she reveal it? Well, if it's a crime, if you know a crime and you don't report it, that's actually a crime in itself. It's called misprison. If you know somebody is stealing or embezzling, and you don't say anything, and it comes out later when they get caught, you can face a charge for misprison of whatever the crime was they were convicted of. Adding fuel to the fire is the revelation that the Central Intelligence Agency has been less than forthcoming about documents related to the Benghazi attack. Now, remember, it came out last week that the Pentagon had been in contact with the State Department saying they had forces ready to go to intervene at the consulate, directly contradicting Hillary's sworn testimony before the committee that the reason there was no response to the attack on the consulate was there was nothing within range. There were no assets available and within range. And now the Pentagon has basically come out and destroyed that. She lied under oath to the Benghazi committee. Now, we're still seeing this story all over the place about how the FBI may bring charges against Hillary. It was even on Fox News, and I'd love to see it happen, but I'm sorry, I'm doubtful. I'll be pleasantly surprised if the FBI actually does its job. But remember, the FBI has been acting as the Clintons' protector going all the way back to the murder of White House Deputy Counsel Vincent Foster, which is the event that triggered my involuntary career change from visual effects guy to truth activist. And I don't expect the FBI to all of a sudden develop a conscience and a soul. Because Hillary can turn around and say, yeah, Vince Foster was murdered. The FBI covered it up. So I'm not hopeful the FBI is going to do their job. But there are some other people out there. Juanita Broderick, who was actually raped by Bill Clinton, is now out there in public with Twitter and just following them around and saying, yeah, here you go. I got raped. Hillary tried to silence me. She is not a champion for women's rights. Go get him, Juanita. Go get him. All right, we're coming up here on our top of the hour commercial break, news break. And when we come on back, more about the candidates, more about Donald Trump, who at this point is starting to look unstoppable short of being shot at, which is a real possibility in this day and age. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And we have callers already waiting on the line, so we're going to start with Andrew in New York. Aloha, Andrew. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. I want to talk about the refugee crisis and immigration. The result is the refugee crisis was caused by the U.S. wars, the U.S. war in Syria and Iraq and other places.
Well, that seems to have goaded it along, but it's now come out that a lot of the refugees flooding into Europe were lured there with promises of all kinds of free goodies they were going to have. And, apparently, there was this huge mass sexual assault in Cologne, Germany, and apparently somebody was saying it was legal to rape women in Europe to get these people to go there, and that was the source of that confusion.
Yeah, it's been George Soros and his foundation, I guess they're promoting a New World Order agenda where, they're trying to destroy, nationalism and borders and, et cetera.
Yeah, but it's backfired because it's actually resulted in a surge of nationalistic feeling all over the world.
Yeah, and interesting enough, I found that the U.S. government, the UPS is secretly, transferring, supposedly refugees. We don't know where they come from. But I heard during the midnight they go through the airports without security, and they're just sent throughout the country.
Yeah, it is rather amazing, and again, it could lead to a situation of extreme unrest in the streets of the country. Not here, just here in the United States, but in Europe. That's certainly what they went through in Cologne. The police literally couldn't deal with that out-of-control situation on New Year's. And, of course, if that were to happen here in the United States, it's another excuse for the federal government to say, okay, national emergency, no more Constitution, no more Bill of Rights, turn over your guns, turn over your gold, and, we're just going to blur you all together. But at this point, it feels like the whole globalist New World Order agenda is in serious, serious trouble. And again, because it was planned with a lot of wishful thinking, and they really didn't analyze carefully all that could go wrong with the plan.
It seems like whoever opposes this immigration or the flood of refugees, the media, the corporate media always comes down and says you're a racist or you hate immigrants and all this propaganda, which is not true.
Yeah, obviously the corporate media is on board with this agenda that we should just open our borders and let everybody come on in here. And again, the clear intent is to blur all of mankind together into a single mass of obedient, pliant workers with no sense of who they are.
All right, thanks, Michael.
All right, thank you very much. And we're going to switch over here to Glenn in Pennsylvania. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hello, Mike. I had recently read online a story that basically talked about Hillary's health condition, and it supposedly quoted a prominent neurologist who, worked in a teaching hospital and was on all sorts of special national committees and stuff like that, who said that it could well be the case that she's suffering from something called post-concussion syndrome from a fall she had previously.
It's possible. The medical conditions are hidden from the public. I mean, most people were amazed when Franklin Roosevelt finally passed away. They had no idea he'd spent the last several years of his term in the White House in a wheelchair. Franklin Roosevelt's version of Air Force One literally had an elevator that would descend from the belly of the plane so that they could roll him in there and pull him back up in there. And all the photos at the Oval Office were set up to hide the wheelchair. And, they kept that from the American people pretty effectively. Most people were unaware of John F. Kennedy's serious back injury and or how many medications Richard Nixon was on toward the end of his term in office.
Right. Yeah. But it depends on the type of impairment. If it's just, if it's an orthopedic injury, that's one thing. But this apparently, and I kind of wonder about the veracity of it. Supposedly, even Huma Abedin admitted that Hillary's experiencing, bouts of confusion.
Mm-hmm.
So that could just be from being a progressive, though.
Oh, progressives are never confused. They may be ignorant, but they're absolutely certain that what they're doing is right.
Oh, okay. Well, then back to the neurological issue.
Yeah, it is an issue, and I wish we had hard information about that. I mean, the fact that Hillary did have that fall and did suffer some degree of concussion, that much is known. Whether there are lingering effects, we don't know, and it is mostly speculation at this point.
Well, yeah, definitely. But at some point, I suspect, an impairment of that sort would become evident, no matter what they do. But
maybe that's why. Maybe that's why Bernie Sanders is campaigning so hard to be Hillary's vice presidential running mate, because he's going to let her get into office, then she's going to have a breakdown, and he'll get that center seat after all.
Bernie Sanders needs to. All right. Take care. Thanks.
All right. Thanks an awful lot for the phone call. Now then, rather interesting observation in an article over at RINF.com that Trump's popularity may be due in large part to blowback from U.S. government policy, mostly foreign policy. Trump may turn out to be a reactionary president, the way Jimmy Carter was, where the American people are just fed up with the establishment political hacks, the apparatchiks, and they want some new blood in there. And by the way, I'm fully in agreement with that. It's time for some new blood in Washington, D.C., but it can't just be the White House. If we're going to put Donald Trump into the White House, we have to give him a Congress that is willing to work with him, and that means all of the establishment incumbents need to get voted out. All the Israel firsters need to get voted out. It's got to be a clean sweep, and I am predicting a tremendous anti-incumbency fever sweeping the nation this election season. All righty. Now, Donald Trump, for some reason, is getting up in arms over the fact that Great Britain may ban him from entering the United Kingdom over his Muslim statements. And yes, Great Britain is wrong to do that. I just don't understand why Donald Trump is all that hot and bothered to go to Great Britain anyway. But Trump is showing his hardball side, saying that if the United Kingdom bans Donald Trump from entering, they're going to start pulling out all their investments, most of which are in Scotland. And they're talking about £700 million of Trump investments in their economy that he can just ask for his money back and take back home. Now, I hope that situation doesn't escalate. I'd like to see some common sense break out there over in the Parliament, or number 10. But these days, it does seem like too many of our leaders are really listening more to their ego than they are to anything else. Remember on that speech Obama made Monday and how many times he's talking about himself? Talk about narcissistic personality disorder. Now then, Trey Gowdy was asked if he'd support Donald Trump if Donald Trump becomes the GOP nominee, and Trey Gowdy said, I'm going to vote for the Republican nominee, period. which, yeah, he's a Republican, and he should. But he's demonstrating that the Republican rank and file, more or less, are behind Donald Trump. Now, as you know, Ben Carson's campaign manager quit along with about 20 other of the staff, and he's now gone public saying, as far as he can see, Trump will be the Republican nominee this year, barring a tragic mishap. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, according to the latest NBC poll in the new year, Donald Trump is leading with 35%, Ted Cruz 18%, Marco Rubio 13%. I'm seeing a subtle shift in the news coverage away from Cruz and toward Rubio. And the reason for that appears to be that everybody is now well aware that under the Constitution and the natural-born requirement, Ted Cruz cannot run for president. And apparently there was even, the matter was brought up at a White House press conference where the spokesperson there was saying, it is kind of weird. We've got somebody who was born in Canada who only renounced his Canadian citizenship 15 months ago, running for president. Ted Cruz's defenders are still out there saying, well, Obama did it. Obama did it. No, he didn't. We've laid that out before. All right, let's grab ourselves a phone call here. Mark in Texas, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. I was just driving on my way home, and I turned Fox News on Sirius Radio.
Yes.
And to see what's happening with the economy and all that. And this fool, Neil Cavuto, was on. I don't know if he's a fool or he's just lying. He said that he said that he's worried that China might do what Putin did, and that's because Putin's economy was so terrible. That's why he attacked. That's why he did what he did to Crimea and Ukraine. But in the first place, Russia's economy was actually better at that time. Oil had not yet started to crash. Actually, I don't even think their economy is that bad right now.
No, Putin didn't do anything to Crimea. Crimea voted to secede from Ukraine following the U.S.-backed coup d'etat, and then they voted to merge with Russia, and Putin said yes. But you can count on the corporate media. As the economy starts to unravel, they're going to look to blame it on anybody else they can. Russia, China, flying saucers, Elvis impersonators, whatever. These corporate media outlets are owned by these giant Wall Street corporations. They are never going to admit that what is bringing down the U.S. economy is private central banking and Wall Street corruption. They'll never admit it.
Oh, what I'm saying is, do you think Cavuto is really that stupid that he believes what he's saying, or do you think he's just a mouthpiece for?
He's a mouthpiece. He's paid.
By the Saudis.
He's paid the money that he's paid to read the lies convincingly, so that you think he believes it, and therefore you should believe it. But that's why these corporate media talking heads get paid the huge amounts of money they get paid to be very convincing liars. If corporate media wanted to hire people to report the truth, the salaries wouldn't be there.
The other thing is, they're just about telling us we should interfere and on Saudi Arabia's side against Iran. Now, Iran might not be perfect. I mean, I know they got their problems as far as, being a theocracy, but the fact of the matter is, Saudi Arabia is 10 times worse. I mean, they're just totally bad news, and they're one of the worst, offenders of human rights probably of any regime in the world.
They are. They're an absolute dictatorship, a royal family. They only allow one religion. Iran is actually quite secular. There are not only Muslims living comfortably in Iran, there are Jews, there are Christians. All faiths are given equal protection under Iranian law. Iran is not the problem. Iran has not invaded another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years. But yes, absolutely, Saudi Arabia is provoking a conflict with Iran so that the United States can send your sons and daughters in uniform over to Saudi Arabia to get that long-coveted war with Iran.
Does Iran actually practice Shia law? Is that, or I've heard people say, they behead people, they stone them. Women are not allowed to drive unless they have permission for the. No. I mean, the Shias living in Iran follow Shia law.
But the secular society follows Iranian law. And don't forget, they've got an elected legislature and a president, along with the Ayatollah, who's a spiritual head, but he's not the real power. And you need to actually go out and do your own homework, because everything that you have been told about how bad things are in Iran was told to you by the same people that told you Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons.
Well, I do go sometimes to Press TV. Plus, I watch RT a lot, and they have a lot of Iranian people on there. In fact, on Crosstalk, they had, some professor at the Iranian, and they seem okay. But I also noticed on Press TV, the women reporters are always wearing all that stuff on, in the head.
That's what they're comfortable with. That's their fashion. I mean, back in the 1950s, women wore kerchiefs outside. My mother wore them all the time. It was the fashion. It was what they were comfortable doing. And we shouldn't be looking at going to war with Iran because they refuse to dress and act the way we do. And not all women wear that in Iran. They wear it on the TV networks in order to be polite to their viewers who are following that tradition. But if you want to really learn about Iran, go on over and start finding websites for Iranian businesses, nightclubs, things like that, and you will see it's actually a very urban, hip society over there. And in any event, however Iran wants to live their lives, that's up to the Iranians. Okay, this idea that we have a right to invade them and make them live the way that we in America live is nonsense, especially when you look at how we in America are living right now.
But how about the Americans now they have in custody? Like that Marine and I believe a news reporter.
I think he was arrested on espionage charges. And if you're going to spy in a country and you get arrested, that's it.
Supposedly he was just visiting his mother over there.
Well, that again is coming from the same people who told you that Saddam Hussein had nuclear weapons, that the Lusitania wasn't carrying weapons, that there were torpedoes in the Gulf of Tonkin, a Spanish mine in Havana Harbor, blah, 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 blah.
You got a point there, right?
Yeah, okay.
Like I said, I don't believe anything this government tells me or the media. I just like to confirm it sometimes with you because I know you're big, you're big into that too. You go on your websites that most people don't. And you also, I'm sure you've been on the Veterans for Truth and things like that.
Very much so, yes.
Huh?
There's a video out there. Go over to YouTube. We're almost out of the time on this segment here. Go over to YouTube. Look for a video, Don't Tell My Mother I'm in Tehran. It's a documentary about life in Iran made by an Israeli. And it's very even-handed and balanced. And it shows you they're just people just like us. They're living their lives. They're doing their business. They just want to be left in peace to take care of themselves and their family. That's it. They're not raving kooks or anything the way these ISIS actors are trying to portray them.
By the way, one more thing. Are you going to have Wolfgang Halbig on? I understand you had him on before. I'm
going to try and get him back on the show again, yes.
I talked to him personally yesterday, and, because, about the gun thing and all that, and he was trying to use Sandy Hook. And he's a great guy, and a real patriot.
He is, and he's done a lot of really good work, and they're trying to harass him and shut him up. All right, Mark, I got to let you go. We got to take a break for commercials. We got 3 phone calls waiting when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show. We're going to go right here to the phones and talk to Dustin in New Jersey. Aloha, Dustin. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Mike. Hey, speaking of some of these, all those liars on the mainstream media, I think they didn't pay Poppy Harlow enough money around Christmas because her batteries ran out. Did you see that video where she slurred her words and stopped? They had to switch the camera off of her.
Well, maybe the medication ran out, or maybe she was just too much into the holiday spirit, which certainly happens. I will grant you one thing. It is very difficult work being a corporate media newscaster, mostly because you're just dashing around to get to locations, it can be very difficult and stressful, and sometimes people just fry out.
Just ask Greg Jarrett, remember?
Oh yeah, yes, absolutely.
And Dee Dee Myers of the White House,
Well,
a lot of them are on Alcoholics Anonymous.
Well, Dee Dee Myers, there was another issue there because I theorize. She knew a lot more about what happened to Vince Foster than she was letting on, and because her alcohol problem didn't develop until after Foster was murdered.
That's the thing people need to realize. All these people are paid liars.
That's right.
6 corporations own all these magazines. They have an agenda. People need to do their own research, like you said. And if you look at the economy, like with Macy's, they blame the weather. Or
yes.
with the Chinese, they blame North Korea. Everybody stopped going shopping because North Korea set off an underground. I mean, come on. People need to realize that the economy is slowing is because nobody has any money.
That's right. That's right. The wealth inequality becomes its own doomsday device, as it were. If you're going to work as a White House spokesdrone or a corporate media newscaster, the prime requirement of the job is the ability to stand there with your hair on fire and insist sincerely you cannot smell any smoke. That's the job description.
It's what people don't realize. This is a debt-based economy, and if you have too much debt, you can't afford. It's like gears and spinning gears. If one gear stops, the whole system stops. And what you are seeing is just the beginning. It's going to get worse.
The 11th marble has come back to haunt us, and it's the size of the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs.
But thus, people need to just do your own research. It's not that hard, and it takes you 5-10 minutes. That's it. Just go to Zero Hedge, go, What Really Happened. There's plenty of other websites, but, don't go to CNBC unless you want to get, I always just flip through there and I wind up yelling at this TV all the time because I know they're lying. When they keep repeating the same lies, it's the weather or it's nonsense. It's not. It's the debt. It's too much debt.
You know what cognitive dissonance is, right? That's when what you're seeing with your senses isn't lining up with your assumptions. And it's how the brain tries to reconcile conflicting messages when it wants to cling to its core beliefs. And most Americans didn't want to believe things were going bad, didn't want to believe Wall Street and Washington, D.C. were behind it. But at some point, you reach a point where the cognitive dissonance breaks down, and all of a sudden you're saying, I have to deal with this. I have to realize what's going on. That seems to be happening across the country. I'm hearing it in the phone calls. I'm reading it in the emails. I'm hearing it from people I talk to. They're not even going along with, I'm going to be quiet to be polite and respectful to the government. They're speaking out, and they're very angry. And a big part of that anger is the realization that they have been made utter and total complete fools of by the government and the corporate media. And they're angry about that. And they have every right to be.
I'll tell you one thing. There's not going to be no bailouts anymore. There's going to be bail-ins because you are a unsecured lender to the bank. You're not a depositor anymore. People need to realize that.
They need to realize that, and they need to get their money out of the bank before the bail-ins start. And if the way the stock market is going, we could see that happen in mere weeks. And fortunately, you're still allowed to have cash. You're still allowed to go buy silver and gold. But I think when the economy really comes apart, there'll be a declaration of a national emergency. They'll declare cash illegal. You have to keep your money in the bank, and the bank can help themselves to it when they get into trouble. But they'll be glad to give you, in exchange for your money, issues of stock in a bank that's in the process of failing. So it's a wonderful deal, and you shouldn't complain about it.
And people, if you think FDIC is going to save you, they only have like 80 or 46 billion to secure like trillions of dollars. It's not going to happen. So you'll be paid last.
Yeah, you'll be paid last. The derivatives holders get paid first. That was another one of the changes they made to the law. When they made you an unsecured investor in the bank, they changed the law so that derivatives are brought back under FDIC coverage, and they are at the top of the list of who gets paid.
Okay, thanks, Mike.
All right, thanks an awful lot. We're going to switch over here to Frank in London. Aloha, Frank. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yes, Mike, it's just a question I have for you regards to Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Somalia, and all these other countries, which I believe is pushed by Saudi Arabia to cut diplomatic ties with Iran. I don't know if you agree with me on that.
I do.
think it's pressure. There's some sort of funding.
I think there's pressure from Saudi Arabia and from the United States.
Yeah, definitely. But I have to commend Pakistan. They took a stand to basically told them to get lost.
Well, good for them, and I understand that Qatar actually came back and said, we don't want to get caught up in this argument.
Oh, great. That's good. That's good, because I think I really think this is the Saudi Arabia government, if you want to call them that, their last stand, and they're just trying to use this sort of bullying tactics, which I think isn't going to work.
Well, again, I don't think this was Saudi Arabia's idea. I think this is the U.S. government using Saudi Arabia to provoke a conflict so that the U.S. now has an open door for the war with Iran, which they have been wanting all the way back to 2003.
Yeah. And just one more thing before I go. Anybody who has any doubts that this housing situation in London is a bubble and it's about to burst, it's already busted, but I think they're not letting you know on mainstream media, because we've becoming a very rent-based economy in London. There's nobody buying properties anymore.
We're seeing the same thing here in the United States of America. Private home ownership is under attack. All the homes that have been foreclosed have been bought up by large corporate interest and turned into rental properties. It's the new feudalism, where, the American dream of home ownership is gone, and the next business model is everybody lives their entire lives paying rent for everything they need to their lords and ladyships.
Yep, and that's exactly what's happening in London. Most people on an average wage are being pushed out of London now. It's very difficult to maintain a decent living standard now.
We're seeing that here in New York. We're seeing it in San Francisco. And it is. And it can't sustain. You can't have an economy that is operating just for a few percentage points at the top. It's just going to come apart.
Yep. Okay, Mike, thanks.
Thank you very much. We're going to let you go here. Now, Jeb Bush has ruled out a third-party run if Trump wins the Republican nomination. Actually, it's pretty obvious at this point Jeb Bush can't win the nomination, but he's basically saying he's not going to try third party because his numbers haven't been good as an official GOP candidate. As a third party, he really wouldn't have much of anything else, and he's still expressing his opinion that Donald Trump is a jerk. Ooh, there's good political insight for you here. Now, we're coming up on a commercial. When we come on back, some more about what's going on with politics with Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and more information about Barack Obama and his gun grab. We'll be back after these few words. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. Now, Democratic National Committee Chair Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who has made no bones about the fact that Hillary will be the Democratic nominee this year. We don't care what the Democratic delegates or the Democratic voters want. It will be Hillary. In an interview with the New York Times, she came out strongly against legalizing marijuana, thinks it's a bad idea, absolutely should not be allowed to happen. And as it turns out, she is courting alcohol political action committees as one of the largest sources of campaign funding. So that's the reason for her anti-pot stance. Now, Obama is getting ready to have a town hall meeting about gun control. It's going to be aired on CNN. It's taking place at George Mason University. And apparently George Mason University sent out a mass email to all the students not to bother showing up, because the public and the students of George Mason University will not be allowed in. George Mason University's only role is to provide the venue, which means everybody who's in that town hall meeting is cherry-picked to sit there and cheer their heads off every time Obama talks about banning guns. It's not a real town hall meeting. It's another theater presentation. Amazing. We were talking about the big scandal over the migrant riot on New Year's, women being abused, completely out of control. The Cologne police chief is saying they just weren't prepared for how out of control it got. Now we're getting late word from Germany that everybody identified as taking part in that mass assault of women is now facing immediate deportation. Merkel, of course, is out there saying, look, if we're going to open our homes to refugees, we're going to have to learn to deal with some of these problems. And apparently the mayor of Cologne came out with a guideline on how German women should dress so they don't provoke sexual thoughts in all of these refugees. Now, Angela Merkel herself is looking at a potential split of her coalition over her continuing refusal to put limits on the number of refugees pouring into Germany. Because the leader of the sister party in Merkel's coalition is absolutely saying, we have to get this under control. And everybody's wondering, what is Merkel doing? Who is she answering to? That she is maintaining this idea that the borders should be wide open and everybody should come on in. Well, she's listening to the New World Order people, the globalists, who want to blur all of mankind together into one mass of humanity with no sense of a regional or cultural or historic or national identity around which opposition to oligarchy could be formed. Story coming out of Lew Rockwell, showman-in-chief, con-man-in-chief. And he's basically talking about Obama's clear evidence of mental instability, narcissistic personality disorder. And somebody made a really good parallel about the gun grabbers. We all know that alcoholism can be a problem. We all know that drunk drivers are a problem. But you don't go after the people who are having just a beer or two or sipping a martini at dinner. They're acting responsibly with their alcohol, and you don't bother them. So why are you going after the people who handle firearms responsibly? Because the government is afraid of you, is really what it comes down to. Now, Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton sold and shipped Muslim nations $549 billion worth of guns and ammo over the last 7 years. But they want your guns. Kind of a little double standard there. Dianne Feinstein is still insisting her ultimate goal is to disarm all Americans. Now, Dianne Feinstein herself carries a gun, has a concealed carry permit. It's okay for her to have a gun, but the rest of you, we can't trust you. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call. Elizabeth in Connecticut. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Thanks for taking my call. I liked the tweet that Donald made yesterday about Hillary and her bodyguards. I thought that was classic.
Yeah.
But, yeah, that was awesome. I'm actually calling, I don't know if you posted this, but, this is regarding Germany and history. There's been a documentary made recently by a guy named Dennis Wise, which is a 5.5-hour documentary on World War II, on the causes in World War I, and it is amazingly made. It's really, really mind-blowing. It's called The Greatest Story Never Told.
I've seen that whizzing by, and we're on. I mean, even the research I did for All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, we've come to understand that when government and media tell us a reason for the war, it's not the real reason. There's always another reason tangled up with money and empire and resource control and power projection. But they have to come up with some reason that, we'll think, oh, this is a just and moral war and we'll move forward. I mean, even Abraham Lincoln did that. The Civil War was all about bringing back the secession states into the Union. And Lincoln used the slavery issue to convince people in the North that it was okay to invade the South. And Lincoln actually had said at one point that if he could have maintained the Union and by leaving the slave states, he would have done that as well.
It's amazing how much almost everything that we are told about history is a complete lie. So
it is. I mean, history is a joke played by the victors on the vanquished in front of an audience too scared to laugh.
Yeah. Well, I hope you repost that video. It's a 5.5-hour video. You watch it in little 20-minute segments, and it's beautifully made, and it's really mind-blowing, and I think America really needs to know what World War I and World War II were about so they can confront what's happening today, because we are today in the Weimar Republic.
Yes, we are. We're not as deep into it as Germany was prior to the rise of the Nazis, but we're getting close. And I don't want to see the rise of a new Nazi party in the United States of America. I mean, what we've got already is the Fourth Reich. But, coming out of all this banker-inspired turmoil, I mean, what set the stage for World War II was the imposition of a private central bank on Germany following World War I. And it destroyed Germany, and that basically opened the door for the Nazis to sweep on in. revive Germany's economy. And when they started doing that, that's when plans were made to destroy Germany a second time.
It was that. It was the bankers. It was the finances, but it was also cultural Marxism, a complete degradation of the culture of Germany.
Yes.
And that also kicked in, and I think that's what we see here a lot. I mean, our culture, our music, everything is promoting harmful behaviors to our kids, to everybody in general. So we're really in kind of a dark ages, and it's...
Yeah, I think we are. I think we're heading into a new dark ages. Just like the fall of Rome started the last dark ages, I think the fall of the American Western Empire is going to take us into a new dark ages. I'd hate to see that happen, but again, we're seeing a lot of symptoms, a lot of parallels between... Go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I do think Trump gets it. I really do. I think when you listen to him and you listen through the rhetoric and his way of talking to the people with his populism and all that, I think he gets it. And what I see from Trump is that he's studied for a really long time how media works. He always seems to be one move ahead of these terrible pundits who are out to wreck our country, honestly. And I just think that behind Trump's billowing talk is actually somewhat of a genius.
There's no question he's a genius. My only concern with Trump is too much of what he thinks he knows about the world he got by watching TV, and in many cases he's dangerously naive about what's really going on. And he needs to get himself some real good political advisors who understand what's been going on behind the scenes in Washington, D.C. and Wall Street, or he's going to find himself lured into a really bad trap. But yeah, I want to see Trump win. I want to see Trump win.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, thank you so much for giving me some time, and thank you for all the work you do.
All right, you got it. Thank you very much. We're going to let you go. We're coming up on our next top of the hour news and commercial break. When we come on back, we're going to have Fred Grieger, author of Chase the Rabbit, talking about the eradication of property rights in America and how it has relevance to what's going on with the Hammond Ranch. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. And I must have said something that upset somebody, because the WhatReallyHappened.com server is now under massive denial of service attack. So we'll let them throw their tantrum, get it out of their system. Meanwhile, joining us on the line right now is Fred Grieger. And Fred is the author of a book called Chase the Rabbit. We put up a link to the Amazon page for that book on the website when it comes back, about the eradication of property rights in America. So, Fred, thank you for spending time with us today. Fred, are you there? I am not hearing Fred.
I know.
I can hear you.
Oh, okay. All right. Little glitch in the control room there. So, Fred, start out, first of all, telling us about Chase the Rabbit, what it's about, and we'll go from there.
Okay. Yeah, sorry about the glitch. I assume you can hear me now.
I can hear you just fine.
Okay, good. Sorry about that. Well, yeah, as you just mentioned, Chase the Rabbit is about the eradication of property rights in America. But more than that, it really outlines for the reader how that eradication is deliberate and engineered by all of these institutions that you talk about on your show all the time, the banking industry, the federal government, and things like that. The title, for those who think it comes from Alice in Wonderland, actually comes from greyhound dog racing as a metaphor for what I call in the book the illusory American dream, and that's reflective of this deliberate eradication of our property rights. You know, on a dog racing track, you've got racing dogs that are duped into chasing a fake rabbit, which they can never really catch because as the closer they get to it, it's speeded up or slowed down in accordance with the race to ensure that, first of all, the race can never stop and the dogs can never actually achieve, their goal. And that's kind of how I view the middle class struggle of trying to achieve self-reliance, real property ownership. Nobody can really own their house in this country. The mortgage industry, the banking industry, the monetary system, the tax system, all those things are set up to ensure that we can never catch the rabbit.
Well, I mean, we see that in a lot of areas of our economy, like planned obsolescence, which is the goal is to keep you working constantly just to stay where you are and having to buy the same thing over and over again. New car every 5 years, new computer every 5 years. Nobody wants a product that's going to last for a long time because that maximizes profits for these corporations. And yeah, it is a means of keeping Americans where they are. No matter how hard they work, they cannot improve their lifestyle.
Absolutely. And, you speak a lot about the banking industry. I saw your video that you produced called All Wars Are Bankers' Wars. And it's very good. And but it goes beyond just wars. I mean, that whole thing speaks to the absurdity of our whole Keynesian economic model. You know, it was John Maynard Keynes who said you can grow an economy by digging holes in the ground and filling them in again. And bombing holes in foreign countries is no different than digging them and filling them in again as a means to create economic activity. And one of the main points I make in the book is that economic activity is not the same as growth.
Economic activity is not the same as productivity. I mean, if you're digging holes and filling them in over and over again, you can justify giving somebody a job, but you don't have anything left over from that to sell, to bring new wealth into the economy. Right. When you reach that hole digging stage, it's basically an indication your economy is already in serious, serious trouble.
Absolutely, because then it's all consumption based, and we've heard mainstream so-called economists say that. People like Paul Krugman, they say things, these absurd comments like consumption is the engine of economic growth. But if you think about it, after you've consumed something, it's gone. So to grow an economy by consuming stuff, you just have to consume more and more and more forever. That then, of course, leads to economic, not just economic, but environmental destruction. The more you consume, the more waste you produce, you destroy the environment. Mm-hmm. And that then reveals the hypocrisy of these leftist environmentalists that, they're really political operators that are after political power through the environmental movement, when in fact they're really hypocrites because they support the very same monetary system and economic model that is a growth through consumption-based model.
Well, you're absolutely right, and we've commented about that before. Basically, we're looking at the eradication of property rights. You don't really own your home. We have seen abuses of the eminent domain law starting about 10, 15 years ago. Before the government had to have a really good reason to take your home away from you, like there was a highway or something coming through. Now, in recent years, we have seen governments seize a property for no other reason than they want to make it available to a developer who will generate more revenue and more tax revenues with that property. And, of course, that really does tell you that ultimately it doesn't matter how much you pay the banks. Your home is not your own. It can be taken from you for, just on the whim of somebody who thinks he can make more money with it. Now, I'm sure that you've been following the situation that's been going on up in Oregon with the Hammond Ranch. It's a continuation of policy we saw at the Bundy Ranch, the Red River area in Texas, more in Utah. And what is your take on what's going on up there?
Well, it's interesting you bring that up. I have been watching that it only started a few days ago, and it was interesting because the first headline I read about it was on January 2nd, and that was on Huffington Post. And the headline that Huffington Post put up said, "A militia has taken over a federal building in Oregon." And then when you read the article under it, it doesn't even mention that. Then it says a protest in support of an Oregon rancher, and goes on to talk about the story. So, the propaganda, first of all, that's coming out about it is really insidious because they're trying to paint these guys as these whack job, redneck militia people. And it's not that at all. The Hammond family, according to the history that I read, has been, harassed by the Bureau of Land Management and the Fish and Game Commission literally for decades. And it kind of goes to that, what we were just talking about. It's a symptom of a larger issue that's been pervasive in the United States for decades. I live in Pennsylvania, for example, and in my state, just as an example, in my state in 1950, or about 60, 65 years ago, 56% of all agricultural production came from private family farms. Today it's only 2%. 2% comes from private family farms because all of those private farmers have lost their land, either through seizure for non-payment of property taxes or by state or usually federal governments, imposing upon them unrealistic compliance regulations and things like that make it impossible for them to continue to operate their farms. And that's what the Hammonds have been facing for decades.
Well, the Hammond's neighbors have already lost. The Hammond Ranch was the last holdout in the area, and some of the things the BLM was caught doing, apparently I think it was back in 2008, the staffers at this wildlife refuge, which is what the land is nominally being acquired for, literally diverted water flow into a lake in order to make the lake grow and flood out the ranches that were on its borders. To put them out of business, and then the BLM comes on in and buys them up at pennies on the dollar. So it's a very abusive process, and very clearly home ownership, ranch ownership is under attack as a matter of U.S. government policy. Now, we know one of the things that is driving that, of course, is that following Richard Nixon's ending of gold convertibility for the Federal Reserve note, the U.S. government is pledging public lands as collateral on government borrowing, even though that's clearly a violation of the Enclave Clause. And so the more the government borrows, the more land they have to grab to pledge as collateral, and we're going to wind up as tenants on the land that was owned by our forefathers.
That's absolutely true, and the government's not only pledging U.S. land to cover its debts since the end of Bretton Woods in '71, they're pledging American labor. I mean, that's what issuing bonds is all about. When people say the good full faith and credit of the United States allows the United States to print money, people don't understand what the full faith and credit means. The full faith and credit is you and me and every laborer in this country. The entire labor market has been conscripted in the future earning.
Fred, I'm sorry to cut you off. We got to take a 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking with Fred Grieger, author of Chase the Rabbit, about the eradication of property rights in America. And before we went to the commercial break, Fred raised an important point that Americans need to understand and don't, because it's not being taught in the public school, certainly not by Common Core. When the U.S. government issues a Treasury bond, that is basically a promise to whoever holds that bond, usually the Federal Reserve, that at some point down the road, the U.S. government will take money away from you, the American people, without giving you anything back for it at all to give to the bondholder. Now, that's a pretty good definition of slavery. And people like to say, well, the Federal Reserve note isn't backed by anything. It's not backed by silver or gold. It is backed by the future slave labor of the American people, your children, your grandchildren, and so forth.
You hit the nail on the head, and that's the one aspect of it that most people don't really get their minds wrapped around. Is it's the same as when an individual goes into debt. If you buy a house or take on a mortgage to go into debt, you are pledging your future labor as the means with which to repay it. When the government goes into debt, it also is pledging your future labor and everyone's future labor in order to repay that debt. I actually worked for a large industrial company, and I had our CEO sit there and tell me one day that the national debt didn't really matter, and that it wasn't irrelevant, it wasn't going to hurt the economy, that our national debt was growing. And I was bewildered by that comment coming from the head of a major industrial manufacturing company who had absolutely a complete lack of understanding of real economics. Debt is labor conscription. It's by its very definition. Government debt is labor conscription without your consent.
Well, there's something else you need to keep in mind. There's no control on government borrowing, and every time a new Congress and a new administration comes into power in Washington, D.C., they'll just start issuing more Treasury bonds and just kick that debt forward. The problem is, right now, today, there is a huge Treasury bond bubble. There aren't enough American workers to make good on all those Treasury bonds, even if we were being taxed at 100%. And that is the real threat right now.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Actually, that's just the tip of the iceberg, because it's not just a bond bubble at the federal level. Municipal bonds issued by local governments and state governments are paid for with property taxes, and most people don't realize that. So there's a bubble there, too, and when that bubble bursts, people are going to lose their homes and their properties because property taxes are going to go up. People aren't going to be able to afford them. That'll happen at the same time that housing prices go through another crash. So people will again face the same 2008 housing collapse climate, where people were underwater in their mortgages at the same time that their property taxes have skyrocketed. That's going to happen again. And we haven't still recovered from the first one.
No, we haven't. It's been a continuous process, and now George Soros is saying we're going to see 2008 happen again. Part of the problem was, of course, that those municipal governments encouraged property prices to be frothed up and artificially inflated because that increased property tax revenues. But it all goes back to the fact that the debt is just unmanageably huge, and that goes back to the basic design of private central banking, which creates more debt than money with which to pay the debt. And over time, the debt grows and grows and grows and grows until so much economic activity is devoted to simply maintaining that debt. There's nothing left over for improvements. There's nothing left over for maintenance or anything else, and the system comes crashing down. And that's really at the heart of all that's going on across the globe right now.
Absolutely. And that mechanism, together with the other, when you connect the dots with progressive taxes and property taxes, public school funding, all of those things, when you connect the dots and all those are all this elaborate means of fundamentally eliminating property rights for individuals. And every one of those institutions is Marxist. And that kind of, if I can elaborate on that a little bit, that kind of brings me to my big pet peeve. And I know that you had a look at my book. One of the chapters in my book is called False Flag Capitalism. It's where I talk about how our system in America is continually referred to by the media, by politicians, by our school system as being free enterprise capitalist, when in fact every aspect of the fabric of our economy is Marxist. It comes right out of the Communist Manifesto. So it's a very disingenuous thing to continually refer to America as free enterprise capitalism when it's not. It hasn't been for many decades.
I would agree with you that we lost our capitalism many decades ago. I tend to think that our system has gone more fascist than Marxist. Because under fascism, if you're making money, you get to keep it, and if you're losing money, the losses get transferred to the people, and after TARP and bailout and QE and all the rest of it. We could debate that issue at some other point, but you're absolutely right. We're not a capitalist society any longer. The system is set up for corporations, Wall Street, Washington, D.C., to go on solving all their problems by taking more away from the American people, whether they call it austerity or increased property taxes or fees or carbon taxes or Obamacare. The problem is that the American people have run out of money. I think that was illustrated by this last holiday shopping season that was a disaster. But the system seems to have been designed to take all the wealth away from the American people, put it in the pockets of the bankers, but nobody really came up with a plan on what they were going to do when they succeeded, and that revenue stream coming in from the American people dries up, which is what's going on right now. And so it is going to fall apart. It has to fall apart. There's no way to keep it going. I'm sure they're going to run those printing presses and type lots of zeros in the computers to keep showering money all over themselves. But you can't pick up an economy by the top 1% any more than you can pick up a building by its roof. It's going to shatter. You have to have a strong foundation for a house or an economy, and in an economy, that foundation is the workers having decent wages and salaries so that they can pump new wealth back into that pyramid.
Yeah, it's going to end in a currency collapse first. Then let me actually back up to what you said about debating fascism versus. I actually agree with you 100%. You're 100% correct. It is fascism. When I mentioned, called it Marxism, I was really referring to what Marx wrote in the Communist Manifesto as, socialism as the economic basis for those various different socialist systems of governance. The systems of governance could be communism, fascism, all those things. They treat property rights a little bit differently, but the common denominator is they all eradicate property rights in a different way. But you're right. We have fascism because we have an elimination. We have property, the illusion of property ownership without control, which forces people to have all of the cost and risk of ownership without all the benefits of ownership.
Oh, you're absolutely right about that one. You can get fined for collecting rainwater on your own property.
Exactly.
And if that doesn't tell you you're not really in control of your home, nothing will.
Absolutely. Yeah.
All right. Well, we're coming up on another commercial break here. Do you want to stick around for another segment? Have you got more that you want to share with us?
Sure, I'd love to.
All right. Well, then we're going to take a 4-minute break for commercials. We'll be back with Fred Grieger and one more segment out of Chase the Rabbit after these few words from our sponsors. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're still talking with Fred Grieger, author of the book Chase the Rabbit, about the eradication and erosion of property rights in America. And as I mentioned in the last segment, if you think about it, even though you may live under the belief you own your home, clearly you're not in control of it. I mean, we've had people who've been trying to build homes that will function off the grid, solar power, self-contained water, and inevitably the local government will come on and say, you have to hook up to water, you have to hook up to power, you have to do this, you have to do that. If you collect rainwater on your own property, you get fined and go to jail. Obviously, if you're not in control of your home, then you don't really own it. It's just an illusion they're selling you at 8% annual interest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, ownership without control is a contradiction in terms. So, and that's part of this whole, the insidious way of duping the American public into believing we're free enterprise capitalists. They continuously misuse language in this country like ownership or capitalism or free enterprise. You see it constantly in the Republican primary debates. If you saw the CNN debate, back in, I think it was in September. There was an exchange. I love this. If I can talk about it for a minute. There was an exchange between Ben Carson and Donald Trump. They were both asked the same question by the moderator about their favorite tax policy. And Ben Carson came back and correctly said, well, I like the flat tax because, the progressive tax system we have now, it's modeled after socialism, and socialism doesn't work very well. And he's correct about that. And then Donald Trump, his reply to that was, now wait a minute, we've had a progressive tax system in America for many years now, so it's not a socialistic thing. When I heard that, I wanted to scream at the television because the model of progressive taxes comes right out of the Communist Manifesto. So for him to sit there and say it's not socialistic just because we've had it for a while is disingenuous. It's a lie. And we hear that everywhere in this country, the misuse of language, the mischaracterization of our economic model and our system. And my view and the reason behind that is because the ruling class does not want the people in America to wake up and realize that this election, any election, is not about defending our free enterprise capitalist system. It's about restoring it. Because we lost that system decades ago, and we have to restore it if we want to have any meaningful liberty and freedom and property rights restored back in this country.
I remember when the Occupy Wall Street protests were taking place, and the corporate media kept coming out and describing them as anti-capitalist. No, they're actually pro-capitalist. They want to get away from the system that we have now and get back to a capitalist society where, ordinary people have greater opportunities. Now, another idea that is imposed on us by the corporate media and the government is this idea that you're either capitalist or socialist or fascistic. And that's where we get our descriptions about the first world are the capitalist nations, the second world are the socialist nations, and the third world is everybody else, with the implication that because they're not part of these other two systems that they're somehow inferior. But the reality is that every nation is slightly different, and they have elements from different economic models blended together. There's a lot about our country that is in fact socialistic and Marxist. There's also a lot of policy, especially around Wall Street, that is distinctly fascistic. What we do know is the system is not set up to care for the nation and the people as a whole, but to service a very wealthy group of money junkies and their enablers in the U.S. government.
You're absolutely right. Socialism's definition is central control of the means of production. Now, Marx, if you read the Communist Manifesto, wanted to achieve that by having the monetary system, the banking, the central bank-controlled fiat monetary system controlled by the government. What Rothschild came up with was to have the government controlled by the the central bank-controlled fiat monetary system. And that's what we have. We have a Federal Reserve that controls our government, but either model constitutes central control of the means of production. So what they try to dupe people into believing is that choosing one form of socialism over another form of socialism is better. They're both evil. The real free enterprise system required us to have a system of sound money. That's a precious metal-based commodity standard of money, because that kind of money has intrinsic value. Labor's already been exchanged in order to create it. So you cannot have a free enterprise capitalist system with a fiat monetary, underlying fiat monetary based economic model. The two are fundamentally incompatible. And that's where I think most people get lost in having that understanding, and then they confuse the different forms of socialism. All forms of socialism, whether it's fascism, communism, whatever model of governance they use to implement a socialist economy, all of those depend on fiat money and progressive taxes and all of those mechanisms that are used to destroy property rights. Because at the end of the day, Central control and means of production means that all property has to be centrally controlled. That's why property rights have to be eradicated to implement socialism. To have free enterprise capitalism, you have to have individual property rights. They have to be protected, and the only harbinger of that is the gold standard. Alan Greenspan wrote that in 1960 before he became part of the machine.
And then he certainly switched his attitude at that point.
Absolutely. He was corrupted by the system.
Okay, well, no, I understand exactly what you're saying here. There has to be a fixed commodity base for any honest currency system. Can be gold, can be silver, could be a unit of electricity, could be a gallon of gas. But without that commodity base locking the system down, you're going to see all the out-of-control money printing and self-serving mechanisms of banking that we have been seeing here. I remember not too long ago there was an interesting lawsuit called the Credit River case, where this bank held a mortgage on a house. The owner of the house had gotten into financial trouble, missed a few payments. They wanted to foreclose it. And this guy walked into the court and said, look, there was no consideration given for the mortgage. They didn't give me anything of any value. They just typed some numbers into a computer. And and the jury actually agreed with him. And then the lawyer who was supporting him got disbarred. The judge died in an accident soon after, and they've tried to basically hush it up. But in this case, the bank openly admitted, we just make up the money out of thin air. When you get a loan from us, we just say that you now have all of these numbers in your account, and your obligation to us, your due consideration, is your labor. There was a movie out a few years back called The International, and there's this wonderful quote in there about how it is the essence of the banking industry to keep us all, whether we are nations or individuals, slaves to debt. And that's what it is. Private central banking is a new form of rulership. It's ruled by compound interest, and it's no more legitimate than rule by divine right or rule by slavery. And it only works because the population is brainwashed into believing this is the way the world is supposed to be. We have about a minute and a half left if you want to share anything else with our listeners.
Well, everything you said is absolutely true, and thanks for the timestamp. Just for your listeners, there's a really good series on money and how it works by a guy named Mike Maloney, if you've ever heard of him. If you look it up on YouTube, it's called The Secret History of Money, and it's a 6-part series. It only takes about an hour and a half to watch the whole thing. But he goes into all of that and explains it very well in terms of the distinction between money and currency. Money is sound money, silver, gold-based, commodity-based money. Fiat money is what he calls currency, and that's what you can wish into existence out of thin air. What you were describing was fractional reserve lending, which is how 90% of our monetary base is created. And it is vapor money because banks lend the same dollar to 9 different people on down the line, and essentially that's how it works. And it's difficult for people to understand, get their minds around how that functions, but that video series is very good at illustrating that. And I explained it in my book as well. If somebody wants to pick up Chase the Rabbit, it's in there as well in detail. So there are a lot of sources to be able to learn these things from.
Well, it reminds me of that quote from Henry Ford. It's just as well the American people do not understand how our banking system operates, or there'd be a revolution by morning.
That's absolutely true.
And most Americans don't understand the economic model we live under now is not the one the nation started with. We are back in the economic slavery we fought the revolution to break free of in the first place. We're out of time. I need to take a break for commercials here, and we've got a caller waiting on the line when we come back. Thank you, Fred. Good luck with your book, Chase the Rabbit. There's a link to the Amazon page at WhatReallyHappened.com. We'll be right back. And aloha, America. Welcome back to the last segment of our program today. We're going to take one more phone call this program. Tim in Wyoming, aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Michael. Thanks for taking my call. I was hoping to be able to make it on with your guest, but he mentioned a couple resources for his research, and I want to actually make sure that your listeners can get these resources as well. There was a movie, actually 2 movies that I want to mention. One called America: Freedom to Fascism by Aaron Russo.
Yes.
About 2 hours long, and I'm sure a lot of your listeners know about it. There's also one that's called The American Dream, which is it's a short cartoon. It's about 25 minutes long. It's actually really good, and it's funny, but it's also kind of hard-hitting information. It's something that people once they watch it and see it, they'll think to themselves, "Wow, this is what's really going on." And I mean, it draws out it draws the parallels between what's happened in the past and what's happening today. But there's also a book. There's also another resource to look at too. I mean, not just your past guest book, but the book called The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin.
Yes.
And that is an excellent book. I mean, if you can, and it looks like a really tough read because it's thick and it's imposing, and I think it's probably in its 5th or 6th edition right now. I had a 3rd edition at one time. I don't think I have it anymore, but it's an awesome book. It really is, because it tells, I mean, it essentially gives the history of money, history of fiat currency, the history of, in essence, it's the history of the world based on why we fight wars and what we can do about it.
Very, very much so. Now, I'm getting a lot of emails saying, banks are useful, banks are good, why do you hate bankers so much? And we need to draw a very thick line here, because private central banks have very little to do with your basic Main Street banks. Depositor banks, where people put savings accounts, the money is loaned back out, is a very useful tool for organizing pools of capital among the citizens in order to stimulate business development. And they are, in fact, very useful. But private central banks are a completely different beast, that because of political corruption are able to acquire for themselves the authority to create money out of thin air and loan it at interest to the entire population. And obviously a system like that creates more debt than money with which to pay that debt. And to give you an illustration of how different these two kinds of banks are, when Andrew Jackson succeeded in removing the charter for the Second Bank of the United States, for which he was nearly assassinated, the Second Bank of the United States tried to operate as a normal depositor bank and failed in just 2 years. So they're really two very different creations. It's almost inaccurate to apply the word bank to both of them.
Right. I mean, just having a if you want to call it a safe, basically. Not even because actually, according to the Bible, I mean, usury, interest is usury, which is against the law.
Yes.
And so
for both Christians and Muslims, except the Templars kind of wrecked that for the Christians.
Right, but I mean, if you're lending your friend $100 and your friend says, "Okay, I'll pay you back $110," you say, "No, you just pay me $100." You're not asking them to do something against the law, essentially.
Well, now, interestingly enough, both ancient Christianity and Islam don't have a problem with flat fee lending, where you lend your friend $100 and he says, "I'm going to give you back 110 whenever he gets it to you." It's the compounding of interest, the accumulation of interest and debt that was seen by these ancient cultures to destroy entire civilizations, including, for that matter, Rome. And that's why Christianity and Islam ban usury, and that was the case with Christianity up until the Templars were able to arm twist the Pope into allowing them to engage in the practice of renting their money, is what they called it. And it plunged Europe into hopelessly unpayable debt, which forced King Philip the Fair to grab all the Templars, set fire to them, torture them, execute them, and that was how he got out of that debt trap.
Yeah. Well, I mean, today and your guest was saying something about how he'd spoken with a large head of a manufacturing firm who said to him that there was no such. He said that debt didn't matter. Well, I mean, I've said this myself, and I kind of tend to agree with just the term, just the idea of debt not mattering. But because debt is fiat debt, because debt is not. If we're using what we call the dollar. We're using what we call, I call it a monetary unit. I mean, I don't call it a dollar because a dollar is supposed to be based on a specific weight of gold and or silver. And that's all it's supposed to be. It's not supposed to be whatever somebody decides, because your guest actually said something about a 9-to-1 ratio or something like that.
It's actually worse than that today. I mean, 9-to-1
far worse.
Yeah, it's 30. Right. In some cases, some banks are just given unlimited leveraging on fractional reserve banking.
Right. And what I was going to say is that it's probably something, I mean, honestly, if we take the value of what $1 or $1 in gold and or silver today versus what it used to be worth, I mean, $1 could be a month's wages for somebody in the 1700s.
Oh, yeah, very, very, very much so. I mean, today's Federal Reserve dollar is worth about 4 cents of what the dollar was worth when the Federal Reserve was created.
Right. And there's one other thing I want to bring up, and then I'm going to go because I know it's nearly the end of the show. But
yes,
people say all the time, they say one thing, and it always bothers me, and I try to educate people about this one particular thing. There's a coin that we use, an American coin, that people constantly call a penny. A penny is slang for pence, which is English money.
Yes.
We use a 1 cent coin, which is 1/100th of $1. That's what that means. Cent means 1/100th. Centime is 1/100th of a franc in France.
Mm-hmm.
A cent. We use cents. We don't use pennies. When people say a penny for your thoughts, I say no. I don't want you to give me your cent for my thoughts. And a penny for my thoughts means that we're in England and we're subject to, we're not even sovereign individuals.
Well, I think that's cultural contamination because most of the people who set up the United States were from England. And, they carried within their cultural biases and traditions and religions. And I don't think it's all that significant. It's
just the fact that we use a 1 cent coin, not a penny.
Well, technically you are correct. But I think I'm not objecting to the continuing use of the word penny because I don't think it really is all that significant. Anyway, listen, we are almost out of time. So, Tim, thank you very much for your input. We're going to let you go here. And we got a couple more stories. Getting on back up to Oregon, interestingly enough, the FedEx Corporation has basically told FedEx there will be no deliveries to this wildlife refuge building. They're trying to cut off all possible means of supplies reaching these protesters at the wildlife refuge. And it's another example of how corporations have become the tools of U.S. domestic policy, whether it's FedEx blockading the wildlife refuge, Apple and Microsoft spying on you through the computers. American corporations are tools of the government now. And we need to keep that in mind when we're considering whether or not we want to buy their products and avail ourselves of their services here. Okay, moving on down here. Let's see. Washington, D.C. has quietly lifted the sanctions on Russian rocket engines, much to the incredible annoyance of John McCain. But the reality is Russia knows how to build them, and the United States has lost that technology. We don't know how to do what we used to do 40 years ago. There's the music. Time for me to get out of here and get something useful done with the rest of the day. We'll be back tomorrow, Friday, with the Lady Claire here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay safe, stay informed. Please reach out, talk to people around you. Americans are asking questions. Be there with the answers. Talk to you tomorrow. Aloha, America.